Welcome to the Zeem Webinar Studio. Today, we're going to discuss how to master the art of strategic planning. At a minimum, your strategic plan provides direction and goals for the next few years. And a masterful strategic plan will propel your board and your association to the next level. We chose this topic because almost every association does strategic planning, but for many, the plan gets lost when it comes to execution. This could be because the original plan was missing some key elements, or it could be it was a great plan, but it lacked execution. And at this particular point in time, some associations have chosen to delay their strategic planning process because of the pandemic. And it's more important than ever to get back on point now. So I'm going to show you how to take your strategic planning process to the master level. It's not hard, and I guarantee you the extra effort it will take will make a huge difference to your results. Now, for those of you who are regular attendees at our webinars, you know that we use these webinars to give you timely, valuable information that you can take back to your association and use immediately. These webinars also give us an opportunity to help you see some of the work that we do, so when you're looking for help, you'll think of us. Well, let's get going. So, why does this matter? Well, your board needs a plan to get there. Your board is there to steer the ship. And if they don't know where they're going, they can't steer in the right direction. So a good strategic plan is one of the most important things that the board does. Also, if you have a truly masterful plan and you've got good focus, you will get great results, absolutely guaranteed. So these are two really good reasons why you want to get good at this and take the time to make it happen. So for our agenda today, this is a master class. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to share with you the basics. What does a basic strategic plan look like? What's a better one look like? And what is the master level? It really doesn't matter where you are on the spectrum of strategic planning. All that matters is that you're interested and willing to take the first step to get to the next level. So, what does a basic strategic planning process look like? You've got a new plan every 3 years. The board and the CEO create the plan together, and the plan's documented. Based on our experience, survey results, anecdotal evidence, pretty much the sector has these basics. Now, what does a better process look like? First of all, you've got adequate time to do your strategic planning. What I often find is that organizations, feeling that their directors are really busy, don't want to spend that much time, how quickly can we get this done? It isn't something that you do quickly. This is one of the most important things, as I said, that your board will do. You want to allow adequate time to make it happen. And by adequate time, I mean a good day. So budget a day to do this. That will be enough. And it'll give you an opportunity to do some exploration that you might find that you actually have to do. A better process, there is a facilitator. Now, whether that facilitator is internal or external, it's someone at the front of the room that's managing the process and keeping you on track. That's part of the better plan. Once you come up with your objectives, the better planning process will mean that your objectives are, number one, strategic. You're not down in the weeds. These are high-level strategies. Number two, that you've got a manageable number of them. If you've got 12 things to accomplish, you're just going to spread yourself way too thin. A manageable number is, let's say, 2 to 4, 3. And they are clear and specific. So your objectives, it needs to be very clear what you're looking for here, because that's direction to the board, the current and the future board, and also to the staff. So there are going to be new people coming on board who weren't part of that strategic planning process. Your plan needs to be clear and they need to understand exactly what it's all about. Also in the better process, you've got formal approval by the board. So if nothing else, the board has sufficient skin in the game that they have a motion that they voted on that, yes, this is our strategic plan. Sometimes what happens is, once people are a little bit further away from the strategic planning process, you'll have a director go, why are we focusing on this? I don't think this is important. That's the time that you need to go back to the director. And if you've got the motion that says we passed this, then that's a really good starting point. If you've got a detailed plan, that's an even better starting point. Now, that's part of the master level. We'll talk about that in a minute. And also, in the better process, the CEO is providing regular updates about where we stand with the strategic plan. Now, a lot of you are at the better level right now, or you have most of the elements together of the better level. This is something that I would encourage you to look at as really a base case, because beyond the basics, this is something where there are enough elements to it to actually help you move forward and be certain that you are going to make some forward progress. Now, what's the master level look like and how is it different? Well, when you're going through your process, one of the most important things you need to get settled before you get started on strategic planning is, are our vision and mission relevant and pertinent to what we're trying to accomplish? Because when you look at your strategic plan, you're starting with your vision. Your vision is the aspiration. It's where we want to get to at some point. Maybe it's 100% aspirational and you're never going to get that, but the vision should always be out there. So you want to make sure that you've got a vision that everyone's on board with and it is out there. The point of the strategic plan is over the next 3 years, you're going to get that much closer to what the vision looks like. So vision is really important, and so is mission. So when I'm working with an association to do this, this is one of the starting points. Let's examine the vision, let's examine the mission, and if we need to redo it, that's what we'll do, which is one of the reasons why you definitely need adequate time to make this happen. That way, before you even start doing the strategic plan, everybody's on board. They've either said, yeah, we're really good with what we've got, or no, we've got to change it, and that's been done. Detailed plan. You need to have detail in your strategic plan. If your strategic plan fits on one page, that's great for an overview, but that's not the full strategic plan. What you're looking for in your detailed strategic plan is tactics, milestones, dates, and accountability. So let me give you an example here. Let's say that one of your strategic objectives is to advocate for XYZ, okay? Many ways you can go about doing advocacy. One of the tactics might be, you know what, we've got limited resources. We can't take this on our own. So one of our tactics is that we're going to team up with other like-minded organizations that have the same goals in mind so we can leverage our mutual resources. So that's a tactic, and you want to make sure that's specified in your strategic plan. Now, what comes out of that tactic? Well, the first thing is we've got to talk to these organizations to find out what we have in common. So that'll be one of your action steps. What happens after that? The whole point is you're going to start with the tactic, explain it, get your milestones, your dates, and then who's going to be responsible for them. So a detailed strategic plan has all those pieces in it. Anybody after the fact at any time can go back, read it, and understand it. Board agendas. This is one of the most important elements of execution. You want to make sure that on every board agenda, if you meet less frequently, or at least every other board agenda, if you meet more frequently, that you've got something on there that's about accomplishing some element of the strategic plan. As you all know, often boards get too far into the weeds and they're focusing on operational stuff rather than focusing on the big picture. You need to make sure, regardless of your strategic plan, that you're spending enough time on high-level things on your board agenda. And one of the ways to make sure that happens is that you're always spending a reasonable amount of your board time talking about the objectives that are part of your strategic plan and how we're accomplishing them. So make sure that you're using your board agendas as an effective tool to keep going on your execution. Now, at least once a quarter, I suggest doing a high-level review. So this isn't going to be a deep dive, but it's going to be, okay, let's go through the action steps. Are we on track? Is there anywhere where we're in danger of having to backtrack? Are anywhere we're in danger of failing? Are there things that we need to reconsider here? So a high-level review of everything that's going on with your strategic plan. Then at least once a year, a deep dive, a full review of the strategic plan. Where are we on every single action step? How are we doing for timing? Do we have the right resources? Is there something else we need to allocate? And keep in mind, with that full review of the strategic plan and even the quarterly review, you're going to be looking at your pivot plan. So it's important to have a pivot plan. We've learned that over the last 2 years, haven't we? So make sure that for all of your objectives, if they're relying on something that we are just uncertain about, are they relying on in-person events? Okay, what's our pivot plan if we can't do that? Are they relying on people traveling? What if people can't travel? What's our pivot plan going to be around that? So you want some kind of a pivot plan for each of the objectives where you can reasonably assume the possibility that there might be uncertainty as to how the next 3 years are going to evolve. So pivot plan is important. Finally, in the master plan, The master strategic plan level, you will have a committee that is tracking how you're doing on the strategic plan. You will have accountability from a small group of people that are making sure that we're moving forward on this. So basically what that committee is, that committee has accountability for oversight. That committee does not have accountability for making it happen. That's going to be up to different groups, the board in total, different task groups, different staff members. This committee has accountability for oversight. So if nothing else, they're keeping the board on track, knowing exactly where we are with everything. That's part of the master level of strategic planning. So what do we want to avoid here? And there are definitely things that we want to avoid here. First of all, not taking enough time. I said earlier, you want to spend a good day on this. So make sure you've budgeted enough time to do this. Manage it far enough in advance that everybody can plan their calendar. You want every single member of your board of directors at that event. One of the most important things they could do, make sure they're there and they understand that they need to be there, and it's going to take a day of their time. Another thing you want to avoid is not having a facilitator. This is something where somebody has to be up there providing direction, keeping you on track, keeping you on time. You need a facilitator. Make sure you've got one. You guys know the phrase BHAG, big, hairy, audacious goal. Strategic plans often veer from one end to the other. You don't want a strategic plan that says, continue doing everything we're doing right now, because that's not really a strategy. It might be that you want to continue doing everything you're doing right now, but that's not the purpose of a strategic plan. So that is definitely not BHAG enough. But you also don't want to set yourself up for failure. You want to make sure that what you've got there is accomplishable, and you've got a sense, having gone through the exercise in the board workshop, as to how that's going to happen. Sometimes you might come up with a big, hairy, audacious goal. You start working out how that's going to happen. You realize, oh crap, there's going to be a bottleneck here. We're going to have to reposition what that objective looks like. So make sure that you are at something that is a stretch, but not something that's going to set you up for failure, and not something that's going to set you up for just passively doing the same stuff you've always done. Other thing you want to avoid is not enough detail. Like I said earlier, if anybody joins the board or the staff after you've done the strategic plan, they should be able to go back, read that detailed strategic plan, and understand how you got there and why those objectives matter. That's why you need detail. And you also need to remind people. You can have a director spend a whole day in a strategic planning session, and 3 months later, they've completely forgot what happened. And that's normal. We're like that. We're human beings. So don't expect that because you're the CEO and you put all this effort into making this happen, that everyone's going to remember it without that level of detail. Another thing you want to avoid is no ownership. So ownership means a couple of things. Number one, making sure that every director who is part of that strategic planning process is on board by the time you finish that workshop, that they're all comfortable with it, they're focused, they're good with it, and they're ready to run with it. You also need to make sure that you've got ownership, accountability for oversight, and that's the committee that we talked about earlier. The other thing you want to avoid, and the final thing you want to avoid, is no follow-up. A strategic plan is not a thing. A strategic plan is a process. And a strategic plan does not come to fruition unless you've got an execution process that's actually going to make that happen. So a lack of follow-up is one of the most common problems we run into. We're all human beings. We all tend to put things off if they don't have flames on them. And the thing about a strategic plan is it's to avoid flames in the future and to allow us to take advantage of opportunities. So most times you're not going to see flames because you're not doing the strategic plan. And that's why it can be relatively easy to have it drop to a lower level and not get the attention that it deserves. So what I'd like to do is to give you master level tips at each level of the strategic planning process. So let's talk about the event. This is the on-site event where you're actually going through and producing the strategic plan. Number one, I've said you need to have a facilitator, and I don't just say that because I am a facilitator. You really need one. Now, if you don't have the budget to go outside, find an internal facilitator. Even if it's somebody who's not a professional facilitator, it's better than not having one. So make sure you've got someone who can stand up there and help you through this all. Make sure it's not one of the members of the board of directors or the CEO, because you need all those people to contribute. And believe me when I tell you, you cannot be a good or even adequate facilitator and still actively participate. The two things just don't go together. The facilitator has to be neutral. They have to be Switzerland. They can't be pushing their oar in with their ideas about what you should be thinking. They're there to be your guide and to help you get through it. So make sure that you've got somebody who doesn't need to be participating in the activity itself. Make sure that you've got a full day to do this. If you're doing virtual, you're going to have to break it up a bit. If you're doing it in person, which is ideal, make sure that you've got the bulk of a full day to make that happen. Also, make sure you're using a process. If you hire a strategic planning expert, they're going to come in and facilitate. All of us have our own processes. There's going to be things we all have in common, but we're all slightly different. And that's the great thing that you have going for you, because you can pick a facilitator whose personality and process works with what you know your board's going to be looking for. But whatever you're doing, especially if you're using an internal facilitator, figure out what process you're going to use to get to the end. Keep focused. One of the things that's going to happen as you start talking about stuff is you realize, oh man, we're going down a rabbit hole here. It's important. We need to talk about this stuff, but if we go down that rabbit hole, we will not have time to complete our strategic plan. So you need to make sure you've got a parking lot and that people believe and respect that when something goes into that parking lot, it is going to get attention later. It will show up at a board meeting. It will show up at a task force meeting. They need to be convinced that when they bring something up, it's not just going into a black hole. So make sure people trust that. Now, let's talk about consensus. What you really want to have happen here is that when everybody leaves the room, they're all 100% agreed on our objectives, our tactics, our milestones, and our accountability. You want to make sure in an ideal world that everybody's 100% behind it. Here's something to think about. And I've noticed this, and it's really important to remember. You might be going along through an exercise, and all of a sudden, someone pipes up, well, I don't know, I'm feeling a little bit uncomfortable about that. And if they're a quiet person and they don't choose to pursue it, you may be making a bad move by ignoring it, because everybody else is, oh, keen, yeah, that's great, let's move forward. And there's just this small voice in the corner saying, well, I'm not sure. First of all, that might be the most important thing you need to listen to at this workshop for the entire day. So don't let that opportunity go by. They might say something and everybody else might say, oh my gosh, yeah, we were going in the wrong direction. Why didn't we think about that? Or what could happen is you just keep moving along, everything's going fine, you get to the end of it, and then that one director goes, no, I don't agree with what we did today. Now what do you do? Now, there will be times that not everybody agrees. So you need to have democracy as you go through the process. And one of the things that I find is really helpful here is, let's say that we've got a long short list of, let's say, 6 objectives. It's too many. We know we need to narrow it down, but we've got a lot of comfort level with all 6 of those. We're having a hard time narrowing them down. First of all, can you combine any of them? Are there 2 that you would actually have much the same action steps to accomplish the same goal? Maybe you can combine them and you can take that 6 down to 4 or maybe down to 5. So think about that. Are there any combinations you can put together here where the means to accomplish the objectives are very much the same? Try that first. I often find you can get rid of a lot of objectives on a longer list by just combining them, because they do tend to have a lot of similarities. The other thing to keep in mind is to use different lenses and have people vote. So for example, rather than saying in the early stages, well, what are your top 3 out of these 6, and then ending up with wildly diverse results, maybe what you can do is to start with different types of lenses. So for example, let's vote on 1 to 3 scale how well this particular objective ties back to our vision. Remember, you've now got a vision that everybody's agreed that they're on board with. Okay, how well does this objective tie back to our vision? Because it must. It's really, really important that your objectives tie back to your vision, or you're not moving toward your vision. So that's one lens of looking at it. And it's a different lens. You're asking people to make a judgment call about how well something ties back to the vision, not about how strongly they feel about that particular objective. I like to use that. I also like to use a connection back to the SWOT. I like doing a SWOT at the beginning, and we'll talk a little bit about that later. I know I got a question in earlier, which is going to be really great for talking about that. And then anything else. So try different lenses to have people vote so that they're thinking in a different level. Sometimes people have a commitment to a certain objective because of the way that they're thinking. Try to figure out what that is so that you can make sure that everyone has a chance to be heard and there is a sense that we really achieved consensus as we worked forward on the strategic plan. You do need to make sure that once you're putting the detailed plan together, that you've spent time at the event tying stuff back to your vision. Because when you put this together, when you write out the strategic plan, For every objective, you want to note in your document how it ties back to the vision. This is very important for the detail in your strategic plan. You also want to make sure before the day's out that you've figured out with the board what are the action steps that are going to take here and what are the resources that we need. Dates can happen afterwards, and that's probably something where you want to have the CEO and the staff work together to come back with some what they think are dates that'll work, because remember, a lot of this is going to be on them. Have that come back to the board, go through that. That'll be kind of your next step, and you'll need maybe an hour or so, half an hour at a minimum at your board meeting to make sure you've gone through the dates and make sure they make sense for them. So those are my master level tips for you on the day of at the actual event itself. Now, the plan itself. You want to make sure when you're putting together the detailed plan that you've got your objectives in there for sure, but for each objective, you've explained why. Why did the board come up with this objective? What was the purpose behind it? You also need to indicate what the outcome is. What is the outcome we're expecting from doing this? So you know where you're going with this, and that helps you to keep on track. If we're not getting in the direction of the outcome we had planned, we need to make some changes, or we need to assign some more resources to this. Make sure that it includes the action steps. These are the action steps we're going to take. Here's the timing for each of these action steps, and here's who's accountable. Now, that's going to be staff, it's going to be board, or it's going to be money. And that comes down to resources required. You want to make sure that that plan shows the resources that you're going to need. And if you're going to need staff resources to do it, keep in mind that that means either we are going to ask staff to take a break from current activities so they can add these activities to their task list, or we're going to say to staff, you know what, we're going to bring in somebody else to help you. Is there going to be a new staffer? Maybe you're going to bring in third-party help on a part-time basis. Keep in mind that you need to make sure right up front what are the resources that are going to be involved here. Because if you imagine that magically we are going to have enough volunteer and staff resources to make this happen on top of everything else that we're doing, again, you're just going to stress people out, set them up for failure, and you don't want a situation where your executive director or CEO goes home after the strategic plan and pens their resignation because this is just too much to even contemplate. So look at the resources as you're going through the strategic plan and make sure that you have the money, the time, the volunteers, the staff in order to make this all happen. Now, let's talk about board agendas. Remember I said earlier, the board agenda is one of the best mechanisms that you have in order to make execution happen. You want to make sure that the board's on top of where we are with the strategic plan, and you want to make sure that you have agenda items that are forcing the board to make sure that they're paying attention to this. So once you've got the strategic plan put together, go to your calendar and calendarize which board meetings you want to have follow-up on and what areas of the board meeting you want to have something happen at. So for example, let's say that you've got in your detailed plan, we need to have this done by November. Okay, well, if you've got to have it done by November, you need to be addressing it in a board meeting well before November. So maybe you're going to calendarize that we need to address this at the September board meeting or the August board meeting, depending on how big a deal it is, but get it on your calendar so you don't forget. With all of your tasks, I really encourage you to start immediately. You might say, well, you know what, this can wait till year 3, and maybe it can, but you got to get the ball rolling now because you really don't know how much time it's going to take until you do get the ball rolling. So get the ball rolling, maybe at a slow pace, just fast enough to realize whether we need help, whether we're running into any roadblocks, whether our assumptions were correct. Start everything as quickly as you can, but don't make it an undertaking that you just can't manage. Get the task force together. Get them to have an initial couple of meetings and figure out, is this going to work? Is the timing going to work? Do we have what we need? Start immediately and use your committee effectively. Now, this committee, who knows who's actually going to be on the committee, but use them effectively. Remember, they've got accountability for oversight. So remember, make sure they're on top of it. Let's talk about that committee. First of all, you want to make sure that whoever's chairing the committee is really good at managing task lists, because that's a lot of what it takes to get a strategic plan done. Is you got a list of tasks, it's a good list of tasks, it ties back to your objectives, it's going to make it happen, and you're totally on top of it. Some people are good at managing task lists, some people aren't. Make sure that your chair is. You want your chair to be a really benevolent slave driver, and you want them to be the kind of person that's organized, who will take responsibility before the board meeting to make sure that they're on top of all the tracking and they can report effectively. Make sure that the committee has a mandate so that they know what they're responsible for and that it's very clear. And share that on a regular basis. When the committee meets, they should be very, very clear on understanding what they're there to accomplish. Now, make sure also the committee knows what the board's expecting from them for reporting. How's the reporting going to happen? Is it going to be at every board meeting? How is that going to happen? Is it just going to be written? Is it going to be verbal? How are they going to do it? And when are they going to do that? So they know what their responsibilities are for reporting to the board. Now, let me give you a few final tips. First of all, it is not without effort to put together a good strategic plan and to execute it effectively. I know that, you know that, but it's worth making the effort. There's just so much difference between an organization that has a master level strategic plan and a great execution process versus one that doesn't. At the very bottom end of the scale, you've got something that's something you've got to check. You get that done every 3 years, but that's kind of all that happens with it. Make the effort, put the effort into it, and make sure that the board is on board with it. If you're the CEO and you are the lone voice in the wilderness about why it's important to do a strategic plan and the board isn't on board with it, deal with that first. No point in dragging a bunch of reluctant people into a strategic plan that they don't see the value of. Make sure that you've educated them and informed them so that everybody understands how important this is and they're engaged with the undertaking. Make sure you've invested the resources that you need. Maybe you're going to have to get more volunteers. Maybe you're going to have to get your board more engaged. Maybe you're going to have to hire more staff. Maybe you're going to have to hire outside help. Make sure you have the resources for the objectives that you've decided to pursue. Take ownership. Make sure the whole board and the CEO have ownership of the strategic plan and that everybody knows what our 3 strategic objectives are. If you have to recite them at every board meeting to make that happen, go for it. Make it happen. We want this front of mind. We want to make sure that at all times, the board and the CEO have top of mind what our strategic objectives are. Now, can you do this all on your own? Yes. If you'd like some help with strategic planning or governance in general, get in touch with me. I can talk to you about our leadership support program and maybe there's a way that we can help you. Now, what I'd like to do is head into Q&A. That takes care of the presentation portion of the webinar. I'd like to open it up. AJ, do we have any questions?
Yes, Erin, thank you so much. We actually have 6 questions at the moment. The first one is, how do you get board members to think more strategically and higher level vision, goals versus a tactical operational items?
Right. Okay. You know, that's true of every board meeting even. I mean, one of the challenges that every CEO has is a board members perhaps that are just really comfortable in the operations. You know, that's how they spend their workday, and they feel uncomfortable moving their oversight up to the strategic level. One thing that it is really important to do is to make sure, first of all, that your board members have adequate training, that they understand that they are there to be at this level, not at the CEO's level. That's what you pay the CEO to do. They need to understand that the importance of strategy and the importance of them contributing to strategy. What I like to do when I'm doing a strategic planning workshop is to make sure that we've got an opportunity for the board members to break out into different groups and spend some time crystal balling some really high level considerations. So I like to get them to break out and talk about, you know, where's the economy going over the next 3 years? What about demographics and labor? What about technology? Pick 3 or 4 very high level topics where they literally have to crystal ball. No, we don't know the future. Nobody knows the future, but somebody has to take a guess about what that future might involve. And once we figured out what that big picture future involves, then how does that affect our members? How does that affect the association? And what, if anything, can we do about it? For example, let's say you get together, one group is brainstorming the economy. So they come back and they say, you know what? The economy is going to be going like fire over the course of the next 3 years. Well, what does that mean? It means higher interest rates. Are higher interest rates going to affect us or our members? Maybe. What kind of impact could that have? And is there anything the association can do, either in the pivot plan or the strategic plan itself, to address the impact of higher interest rates? So the answer to your question is really twofold. Make sure that they've got the training, they understand what their role is, and then in the strategic planning workshop, force them into a situation where they must think at that higher level and bring it down to the day-to-day level for strategic planning. That's a very long answer. AJ, what's our next question?
No, that's fantastic. And at the risk of hashtag shameless plug, this is also an area that Erin Roberts excels at with her consultation, and that is board governance. Moving on to the next question, which is, what is the best way to survey members to get more engagement when creating the strategic plan?
Well, first of all, I really like that idea. I've found that when you're doing a strategic plan, often if you can do a member survey in advance of it, that can be very helpful input to the strategic planning process. I want to emphasize two things here. Number one, if you're going to go up to your members and ask them to do a survey prior to doing a strategic plan, make sure they know you're doing a strategic plan. It's important that your members know that the board is actually doing something. And knowing that they're doing a strategic plan helps the members have more faith in the professionalism of the organization. And knowing that they have an opportunity to have input is going to help them feel more engaged. So my point being there, make sure they know a strategic plan is coming. Once you've got the strategic plan, make sure you share it with them. We listen to you. Here's what we heard you say. Here's what we incorporated into the strategic plan. So it starts with, we're doing a strategic plan. We want your input. We've done a strategic plan. Here's how it connects back to your input. Here's the strategic plan. So that's part of it. Second thing I want to very strongly suggest is hire a professional. Everybody figures that they can just come up with their own questions. And this is an art and a science. And I'll give you an example. A lot of organizations would say, well, we're going back to our members and we want them to tell us what we should be focusing on over the course of the next 3 years. So the question we should ask them is, what's the most important thing the board should consider for strategic planning over the next couple of years? Obvious question to ask. The problem is you rarely get good information about that, because getting to the point of what you need to focus on is a process in itself. And they're just answering a survey. Often what you will get if you answer the question that way is just not very good information. And if you follow that verbatim, you may be following something that people really didn't mean, that they hadn't thought through, and it wasn't very useful input. It might have been better to ask the question in a different way. What's keeping you up at night? What are the top 2 things that are going to be a problem for you and other members over the course of the next 2 or 3 years? That would be something that a professional might steer you in the direction of to get better feedback. So really encourage you to hire a professional. It's well worth the money. I also want to keep in mind that you will also learn little tips from professionals. For example, one thing that I've learned from working professionals over the years is it's often a very common thing to say, well, what are the top 3 things, blah, 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 give us number 1, and what's your number 2, and what's your number 3. And you can assume from that all 3 were important. Whereas in reality, often when you ask that question, only the first one was important. They were actually struggling to come up with number 2 and 3. So if you do 2 and 3, you're actually dealing with stuff that wasn't all that important to people. And a professional can help you craft the questions so you're not going to make those kind of mistakes. So that's not a shameless plug for us. We don't do surveys, but it is definitely a plug to hire a professional. AJ, do we have another question?
Thanks, Erin. How do we approach strategic planning in the time of industry upheaval due to pandemic-related evolution of tech practices?
What I think I hear you saying is, should we go virtual or should we go in person? And if that's not what you're thinking and you're on the call, please type in chat and let me know if there's something else that you were looking at. But the quick answer on that is I've done many strategic planning sessions virtually over the course of the last 2 years, and they've all worked well, but in person is definitely better. There's a different dynamic when you've got everybody in the room. The facilitator can see different things when you're in person than you can see on the screen, but sometimes that's the way you need to do it. You know, if you've got people scattered all over the country and you've got a limited budget, is it better to do your strategic planning virtually rather than not doing it at all? 100%, 1000%. Do what you can do. If you can get everybody together in a room for a day, make it happen. If you can't and you've got to do it virtually, just keep in mind with virtual, you've got to break it up. You can't have people together for an entire, bulk of a day staring at a screen.
So we've had some feedback on that one, Erin, and it's wanted to know how to do a strategic plan, whether to do so when you're in the middle of a complete upheaval and uncertainty triggered by the pandemic.
Okay, great point. And you know what? Even now and during the pandemic, I heard people saying, well, you know, there's so much uncertainty here. Why should I be doing a strategic plan at all? I'll just wait until we've got more certainty, then we'll do a strategic plan. The other thing I've heard is, well, you know what, you know, we seem to be stabilizing a bit, but I don't feel comfortable doing a 3-year strategic plan. I just want to do a 1-year strategic plan. Let's address that. There's nothing about uncertainty, which means we shouldn't be doing medium range planning. 3 years is not very long, and I know none of us know what's going to happen in 3 years. We never did. And maybe there's more uncertainty now, but we need a plan more than ever when there's uncertainty. So my answer to that is, there is uncertainty. That is a reality. We will never know what the future holds. We've got to make some guesses now so that we have something that we're steering towards. Remember when I was saying the board steers, and they need to know where they're steering to. If you don't give them a direction, they're going to be all over the place. And who knows, we might be turned around in totally the wrong direction when we actually sit down and do a plan and figure out where we need to be going. So do your plan, do it for 3 years, and have a pivot plan for each objective. Okay, what happens if we can't do this? How are we going to manage it? Don't go overboard. Don't try to address every single possible thing that could happen. But yes, continue even in this environment with a 3-year plan. Come up with your 1-year plan. A 1-year plan is an operational plan. It's a business plan. You should always have that every single year, but it's not a strategic plan. Strategy means you're thinking above and beyond 1 year.
That actually ties in really well with another question we had. It was, given the current environment, is 3 years too long for the strategic plan? Should we just be focusing on 1-year plans for now?
Yeah, ditto, as above. No, yes, you do definitely want to be focusing on a 3-year plan. Build in some flexibility so that you have an opportunity to switch around if necessary, but yes, absolutely 100% 3-year plan.
Excellent. Is there a template that could be shared with the group that would guide us through the steps of a strategic plan?
Excellent question. I haven't seen one. Every strategic planning consultant has their own process. There's no question about it, and they will be different. There are some best practices to follow, and I've shared those with you in this presentation. And by the way, I'm happy to share my slide deck with you. So if that would help, I'm happy to provide it. Like I said, everyone does it a little bit differently. So I can't point you to a website where it is the be all and end all. This is how you should do a strategic plan. I think what you need to do is to, if you're going to do it yourself, do your own research, come back with some things that you think make sense and are going to work. Compare it with maybe what I'm sharing with you and other consultants might be sharing with you. It does add extra work. There's no question doing it yourself, but sometimes that's the way you just got to do it because that's what your budget allows for. Do we have any other questions, AJ?
Yes, we do actually. We have, how can we broach the topic with the board where there isn't a plan already in place?
What I think I hear you saying is we don't have a strategic plan right now. How can I raise it with the board? If that is not the question you're asking, then please type in chat and AJ will interrupt me and correct me. But I think the most important thing to do is to make sure the board understands how important a part of their job the strategic plan is. Now, to some extent, that's a function of training. If you're training your board every year, and you should be giving them governance training, you need to make sure that they understand where strategic planning fits into governance and how important it is to you. Now, if they've already had that training, they should understand how important strategic planning is. If they haven't had that training, then you're going to at least have to do mini training to help them understand why the strategic plan is important. And remember what I told you earlier, the board is there to steer the ship. In order to steer the ship, you need to know where you're going. And that's what the strategic plan does. It tells you where you're going.
Excellent, Erin. We have one last question at the moment. If the vision mission need to be updated, sorry, let me start again. If vision needs to be updated, this needs to be done before the strategic plan is developed, is that correct? Or can it be updated as part of the strategic plan process?
Yes and yes. What I like to do is I like to allow enough time in the strategic planning workshop that we can start with vision and mission. We can either rubber stamp them if everybody feels good with them. I always like to have a vote. How do you feel about this? Is it still relevant? Is it still, do we have a vision that actually is aspirational, or is it just telling us what we're already doing right now? So, but that will always be at the beginning of the strategic planning workshop. We'll start that first, then we'll go into the strategic planning workshop. You could, if you're pressed for time, you could do that separately, but you don't want to do it too far in advance of the strategic planning workshop because you want people to remember why they came up with those elements of the vision. So personally, I like to do it as part of the strategic planning process, but at the beginning of the process.
Excellent, thank you, Erin. That's the questions we have at the moment, but I would strongly encourage anyone, if they would like a copy of the slides, if they have questions after this webinar is completed, or if they would like to take use of the free conversation with Erin about the topic today, don't wait for me to give you a call, although I will be giving you a call in the next few days. Please reach out to us at the email on your screen, ask for these things, and we can make it happen. Thank you, Erin.
Okay, thanks very much, AJ. So please keep in mind, we are on Vimeo and YouTube. All of these webinars are up there and are free to access as you wish. So feel free to use that resource. If you are on this call, but you weren't on the invitation list and you'd like to be, get the invitation directly from us. Just ask me for that invitation. Now, I'd like to take this opportunity to invite you to join us on June 16th. Our next webinar is going to be leveraging your signature event to drive membership. So many of you are going to be having a live event or a signature event over the course of the balance of the rest of the year. Why not plan to have that event be a great conduit into membership? Now, following the webinar, as AJ just said, he will be following up with you to get your feedback. Your input is really important to us. We want to make sure that our topics are relevant to you, that they're helping you. That's what we're here for. So if you've got any suggestions for our lineup, please let AJ know. I'd love to hear your suggestions. And thank you very much. That concludes our webinar. Thanks for tuning in. We'll see you next month.